We have a fantastic panel of two speakers that are going to be speaking for about 15 minutes each to introduce the topic, and then we're going to have a discussion, plenty of time for people to make contributions and have questions. So I'll introduce the speakers as we get to them, to allow everyone to sort of keep up with where we're at with the discussion. So our first speaker, who I hope can hear us, will be on Zoom today. And I'm very excited to introduce Yanis Varoufakis. He needs no introduction, but as a bit of a recap, I have his book in front of me, Techno-Feudalism, What Kills Capitalism. You can also get adults in the room for bookmarks to my left. And he's a politician and economist who was the Minister of Finance in Greece in 2015. So we're really excited to have Yanis speak to us for about 15 minutes. I will give you a warning when you've got 5 minutes left. Hopefully that works over Zoom. But yeah, take it away. Thank you.
Very lonely to be in my living room with all of you sharing togetherness and solidarity, but I feel the solidarity, especially today. Today is the 5th of July, folks. It may not mean much to you, but to us here in Greece, it means a hell of a lot, because 10 years ago to this day, we had a historic event which reverberated. It impacted the left, not in a good way, as it turned out, but it has a capacity of remaining one of the most valuable lessons that the left, that the Marxist left in particular, can learn. It was the day of the referendum. Just briefly, for those of you who were too young to remember or to care, after the latest major capitalist system spasm, which took place in 2008, 2008 was my generation's 1929, financialized capitalism simply buckled under. And you know what happened in London, with the City of London, the austerity that followed, the money printing, socialism for the bankers, and harsh austerity for the many. Well, in Europe, the Eurozone, this remarkably brittle monetary system that was built up so that the European oligarchy, the European cartel, could establish on a more solid foundation its cartel-like behavior. That architecture, that monetary system collapsed. And the most fragile part of that system was Greece, the Greek state, and it buckled under. Essentially, banks went bankrupt all over capitalism, all over North Atlantic capitalism. And Greece was, yet again, the canary in the mine. It was a place where they had to make a choice, either do away with the mechanism by which surplus value was recycled through financiers, or clamp down and force all the losses of the banking system, which were gigantic, upon the shoulders of the weakest of citizens in this country. And the idea was to impose, to turn Greece into a dystopic laboratory of immense austerity, with money printing for the bankers. And then take this model from Greece to Ireland, to Portugal, to Spain, to Italy. George Osborne played his role in bringing it to your shores, eventually coming all the way to Germany. And the Greek people said no. You know, I look at the room in which you find yourselves, and you know, we have a few hundred people. That was always the case with dedicated coverage. Our party in Greece, the one I served for as minister, we used to have meetings like this, you know, 100 people, 500 people, 400 people, and we always used to, at the back of our minds, worry, can we ever take control, seize the means of production, the means of monetary transmission, the means of communication, government. And it turned out that it was a party of 4%, tiny little party. We went to 36%. And once we showed the people a willingness to fight for them, that 36%, 10 years ago, to this day, on the 5th of July, 2015, became a 62%. I can tell you, I could see it in the eyes of the powers that be of the International Monetary Fund people, people like Christine Lagarde, of the European Central Bank, of the Bank of England, of the Federal Reserve. I could see it because yeah, by that historical accident, I was elevated for a few months to the position of finance minister. So I talked to these people. They were panicking. I can tell you they were panicking. We could see that it was a paper tiger, this whole thing that we consider to be this ironclad capitalist epiphenomenon, the epiphenomenon on the capitalist forces of production and distribution. Alas, that very same night, 9 o'clock in the evening, 62% of people backed us. A few hours later, my comrade, Prime Minister, comes to me. I go to him, I visit him in his office, and he tells me it's time to surrender. We had an almighty clash. I resigned. The rest is history. I don't want to bore you more with this. Those of you who remember, remember, and those of you who don't remember, well, you may look into it, because it was an interesting episode. It was completely unplanned. It was spontaneous. A small party that made some radical claims and made some radical promises to the population at that particular cusp in the forces of history managed to gain an overwhelming mandate for essentially revolution. And it was our own leadership that betrayed it. That's a very big lesson for those of us on the left. Comrades, the enemy, when the enemy really strikes at us, it will come from within our midst, because this is what they do. They know how to lure our leading figures. So my great concern, I'm in my mid-60s now, I probably won't live to see another such moment. My concern is that people like you make sure that whatever the party political framework with which you fight for this revolution, that it is totally and utterly connected to the movements, so that no leader of our movement can easily betray it. The mistake we had made 10 years ago was that the fight against the oligarchy, which was conducted by people that I trusted, I personally trusted, I was mistaken to. In the end, once we reached the corridors of power, we left the people out. And we behaved as if we could do it on our own, with the people simply supporting from the outside. No, that can never be the case, unless the movement is genuinely democratic. And anyone who goes inside closed doors, those rooms in which the adults supposedly make decisions, those people must constantly inform the people outside and must constantly be enmeshed in the decision-making process of the many. Now, people ask me, why Marxism? I mean, you old fogies, people like me, who cling on to Marx, what is the point? And the reason why I'm mentioning it is because this is this is what your splendid conference is about, Marxism 2025. Why do we need Marxism? Now, shifting completely away from my introduction and the historical context that is very Greece-centric and also concerns the crisis of capitalism of 2008, let me shed this for a moment and just go straight into what young people say to me in England, in Scotland, in Ireland, in Germany, in Italy, in Portugal, but also beyond, in Mexico, in Brazil, and so on. Their real concern is that we at the left have lost sight of many of the struggles of various movements which divide us. So take the argument that minorities living in the West, an argument which is totally reactionary, but it has a capacity to affect and to essentially infect good people who we must make every endeavor to make them our comrades. This idea about the society of strangers, the argument that minorities living in the West should assimilate. Well, when Marx was a young man, he came across an argument by somebody, Bruno Bauer, that he actually appreciated, a radical thinker, who said that German Jews should renounce Judaism. Why? Because how can we free you, Jews, when we Germans are not free? So his argument was that Jews had a duty to emancipate Germans, to help the Germans emancipate themselves, humanity more broadly, not to agitate for their own rights. We see them. We hear this. We hear this in the north of England. We hear it in the north of Germany. We hear it in the north of Greece. Don't know what's wrong with the north. Anyway, young Marx had no time for Judaism, but he was livid. And he said, and I'll quote, because I think it's a very nice quotation. He says, I ask the converse question. Does the standpoint of political emancipation give the right to demand from the Jew the abolition of Judaism, and from a man the abolition of religion? Just as the state evangelizes when it adopts a Christian attitude towards the Jews, so the Jew acts politically when, although a Jew, he demands civic rights. Now that can be transferred really straightforwardly to questions about Islamophobia, about this.
5 minutes left, comrade?
Excuse me?
Sorry, 5 minutes.
I know. Thank you. I have a big clock here. So take the other point. The point that migrants are migration is an instrument of big capital that big capital uses in order to push down the wages of natives, and therefore the left must consider curbs on migration. Well, there's a beautiful letter that Marx sent to two associates in New York in 1870, and where he begins by saying that, yeah, this is exactly what the capitalists do, capitalist employers. They divide and rule, and they use purposely Irish cheap labor, in that case, in the case of his letter, pitting the Irish migrants against the English or the American proletariat. And a lot of blue labor people have used that letter, but they forget to quote the second part of the letter, which is what? He says, but the solution is never to banish immigrant workers. The solution is to organize them. And if the problem is the weakness of the trades unions or austerity, then the solution can never be to scapegoat migrant workers. So effectively what I'm saying is that if we really want to rise above all the noise, which is pushing us towards disunity, towards migrant bashing, towards denying minorities the right to their own cultural traditions and so on. Marx remains a brilliant source of insight. And I'm going to finish off. I've got another 3 minutes left. I'm going to finish off with, you very kindly mentioned my book on what I call techno-feudalism. Now, everybody's really very worried about AI, big tech, this immense power of Silicon Valley over us. We should be very worried, and it should be part of our analysis. But here Marx also is utterly poignant. And this book that I wrote it as a purely Marxist analysis. Now I may have miscued and maybe a very violent Marxist analysis, but I tried to stick to Marx, not because I am a necrophiliac and I like dead white men. No, because he helps me. And how does he help? Take, for instance, the argument that Google is a monopoly and that it sells a commodity called search. It's the services of its search engine. Well, anybody who has read the first chapter of Volume 1 of Das Kapital knows that this is rubbish, because the Google search is not a commodity. It is not produced in order to be sold. It is produced so as to grab your attention, so as to sell your attention to an advertiser who will sell you stuff. And okay, television used to do this with television ads. If we're going to understand, however, what makes Elon Musk far more powerful ever since he got Twitter, what is the real power of Jeff Bezos? What is the power of Palantir? What is the power of Meta and Zuckerberg? We have to think in terms of the analysis of capital that Marx bequeathed us. It is the kind of capital that they have, not the fact that they can read our emails and find out what it is that we are talking to one another about, and our tastes and proclivities and so on. No, it's what kind of capital they own. What is the capital? My view is, and this is what I'm trying to explain, is that this is a new form of capital. It's a mutation of capital. It's far more powerful and far less productive, but far more powerful than traditional capital. I call it a produced means of behavioral modification, like a steam engine or a robot that produces cars. What lives in your phone produces the power to modify your behavior, and that it gives it to particular oligarchs. The fight against that requires that we have a concept of what I call cloud capital, which is a Marxist term for this kind of capital. Unless we do that, then we're lost in discussions about regulating those bastards and, surveillance capitalism, which doesn't exist. There's no such thing. So, thank you for this opportunity on this very emotional day for me and for many of us to connect with you and to try to convince you, not that you need much convincing, that, the dead, bearded one, Karl Marx, is still a tremendous source of insights for very topical, very contemporary concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that really insightful start to the discussion. It's a delight to have you join Marxism Festival. To complement the discussion, we have a second person joining our panel. Callinicos will be speaking. He's the author of The Revolutionary Ideas of Karl Marx. He's also the author of The New Age of Catastrophe. Both of them you can get from bookmarks. And he's also a columnist for Socialist Worker, which I believe you can get from multiple points across the festival. So I'll pass it over to Alex to speak for about 15 minutes as well. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and hello Yanis. It's great to be speaking with you, albeit in this indirect digital way, this afternoon. I mean, you've reminded us of a historic day, the historic day of the Greek referendum exactly 10 years ago, which for me, as well as for you, and for many, many socialists and working class and anti-capitalist activists around the world was a really great moment, a moment that gave a glimpse of how there is an alternative to what was then the dominant version of capitalism, neoliberalism, that another world based upon solidarity and democracy and freedom was really possible, even if that glimpse only lasted a very short time, unfortunately for the reasons that Yanis talked about. And we agree about so many things, particularly in terms of whom we oppose. We're against the very dangerous and destructive rivalries between the big power blocks that dominate the world. We're against the NATO rearmament drive. We're in solidarity with the people of Palestine. We're also, incidentally, against Russian imperialism. I'm very grateful to the support that Yanis has given to the campaign for the release of the imprisoned Russian Marxist Boris Kagarlitsky. So we agree on a tremendous amount, and that's very important. But life would be boring if we disagreed. Freudian slip. If we agreed about everything. And let me try and find a way into the point of disagreement to have a fruitful discussion. Yanis talked about a very important early text of Marx's on the Jewish question, where Marx affirms against someone who became a really serious and vitriolic anti-Semite, Bruno Bauer, the ideal of universal emancipation, the kind of emancipation that motivated the English, the French, even the US revolution, the great bourgeois revolutions. But Marx was already beginning to see that there was a limit to universal emancipation as it was understood in simply capitalist terms. Because if you simply stay at the level of certain ideals, freedom, equality, solidarity, and so on, that leaves out of account the concrete vantage point, the concrete social and economic vantage point from which universal emancipation can be achieved. And in a slightly later text, Marx describes what he calls the proletariat, to use more modern language, the working class, as occupying that vantage point, as what he called the universal class. In a sense, it's a contradictory idea. You know, universality applies to everyone, but here you have a specific class which is able to achieve universal emancipation. And why? But Marx argues because the working class has the capacity to get rid of class society in liberating itself, to liberate people from all the different kinds of oppression that they suffer from. But that ability lies from the working class's location within capitalist power, the structural power that it has to organize collectively to resist capitalist exploitation and ultimately to overturn it. And this really brings me to the point of disagreement with Yanis, because he's written this book, Techno-Feudalism, which is a very interesting book, which really says that that fundamental conflict has been marginalized. It's no longer the dominant conflict in society. The dominant conflict is between big tech, who control the most advanced technologies of contemporary society, and which exploit us all, as Yanis said, through essentially seizing on the data that we generate for them when we use one of their apps, when we're involved in one of their algorithms, when we do searches and so on and so forth. This is the dominant contradiction in contemporary society. And I'm really sorry, Yanis, I really admire you, and I agree with you, as I said, about a lot, but I just don't believe that. You see, Marx describes feudalism as a situation in which feudal lords use extra economic coercion, force, to compel the peasants, the peasantry who work on the land to support their consumption. That's feudalism. This isn't what we live under the present time. Now, Yanis, one of the great things about the book, that it's written as a dialogue with his late father, and he's constantly imagining the objections that his father might make to some of his arguments. So he, at one point, he imagines his father saying, these people aren't, you know, the big tech bosses. They aren't feudal lords. They're capitalists on steroids. Now, you know, when you think about it, capitalist on steroids, or should I say ketamine, is a really good description of one of the tech lords. But Yanis, with the greatest respect, I agree with your dad. I think that what we're seeing is capitalists who, as previous capitalists have been able to do, Yanis cites the example of, for example, Edison and Henry Ford and so on and so forth, have been able to amass enormous profits, extra profits, what Marx calls super profits, through capturing control of a particular technology. And they're novel features. It's true about what we find with the big tech capitalists. For example, the way in which they use our data as a way of generating revenue. But if you look at how the whole apparatus of big tech capitalism works, it works in a way that is recognizably comparable to the classical forms of capitalism. If I have time to give a couple of examples. I mean, it's true that there are these clouds that are very important to the profitability, to the economic models and profitability of some of the big tech firms. But the clouds and AI generally depend on material things, on massive data centers, and there's a race to construct new data centers. They also are very often involved in producing material things. If we go back to Musk, his firms produce electric vehicles, they also produce satellites, and they have rivals. They are caught up in a process of competitive accumulation. Musk is losing profits and looking over his shoulders at the competition from Chinese EV firms like BYD. Even Amazon, which doesn't produce material goods, which operates in the circulation of goods and services. Absolutely, they rely on a vast network of warehouses and delivery vans. And who, works in those warehouses? And who operates those delivery vans? Workers, classical wage labourers. I mean, if you wander around the streets around here, you see that these are streets that are never empty, because they're full of, I think they're almost universally guys on bikes, desperately trying to make their deliveries on time so they don't have deductions from what usually one version or other of platform capitalism pays them for their services. They're often classified as self-employed. Employers, firms like Deliveroo and so on, have fought massive court cases in order to preserve the fiction that these people are workers. But they are workers. They're precarious, super exploited wage labourers. I could go on, but I have a vigilant chair keeping an eye on me. But I think it's important this isn't a pedantic argument, because it's critically about agency, about how we transform society. I'll put it crudely, if we are in this new technological feudal society, then what we need to do is to construct a broad class alliance to overthrow the new feudal laws, the tech laws. And that involves, and Yanis is actually explicit about this, that involves an alliance with the capitalists who've been reduced, those he's prepared to concede of capitalists, an alliance that includes them, he calls them the vassal capitalists, to get rid of the overlords. That's how the bourgeois revolutions worked, through very broad class alliances. If we're still in capitalism, and I think we are, the key thing is not to do that, but to build on the struggles of workers, including workers caught up in the kind of chains of exploitation that big tech have produced, to organise those workers and fight beside those workers to help to create the kind of self-conscious working class movement that can act as the universal class and get rid of capitalism. I'm going to finish. Now, I think in those two strategies, there are areas of agreement and disagreement. But I want to conclude by saying that this discussion is important, because it's always important to keep up with the enemy and try to understand how they're developing and the particular forms in which they seek to control and exploit us at any time. So the questions about, how to make sense of big tech are really important ones, and it's great that people like Yanis and someone else, another friend and comrade of mine, Jody Dean, are working on this kind of subject. So it's an important debate. Secondly, we may not be able quite to characterize the nature of the enemy, but I think we have the same enemies, and maybe we can just agree to call them bastards.
Thank you, comrades. That sounds like a great discussion. Everyone's having in their small groups. Thankfully, now we can all hear your contributions as we move on to the sort of wider discussion. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone has a lot to say, so I'm quite keen to get started with sort of the contribution bits of the meeting. So just to give people a heads up, we're going to be asking people to put their hand up if they'd like to make a contribution. That can be from a question to up to 3 minutes. When you have 1 minute left, I will tap on the microphone. There we go, you can hear that. And that's your sign to sort of start to wrap up, make your last point. And if I interrupt you and say, please sum up, that's pretty much the sign to just finish the sentence and let's make sure we can hear from other people as well. I do want to make people aware that because this is a theory meeting, we will be recording the contributions so that people watching from home and when we upload the meeting online can sort of follow the discussion. We'll be asking Yanis and Alex to come back at the end to summarize and answer any questions. So it's just to make people not get lost if they're watching it at a later date. But that's not to say if people do not want to be recorded, please approach a member of the tech team, like the comrade here at the front, and make it clear that you do not want your contribution to be included in the final recording for the session. Okay, so that's all from me. Who would like to start? Okay, we've got a few hands up. We'll start with the comrade with the Marxism timetable in pink sitting over there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, first of all, Yanis and Alex, for a very interesting discussion today. Myself and the person sitting next to me I was looking in particular at fighting oligarchy, coming back to the topic of today's discussion, and looking at this through the lens of AI. And social media, because that's so much governed by AI now, you can see it happen, you can watch your own echo chamber forming, etc., etc. However, I think social media stands at a crux point right now of oligarchical rule, I guess you'd call it. We're encouraged to use it, we're encouraged to buy from it, it advertises at us. It's also a platform for great expression, for us to keep together, for us to exchange ideas, influence people, and for the time being at least, we are in a situation where I think that is allowed to prevail. Maybe our oligarchs are remaining somewhat apolitical for the time being, as long as we don't rock the boat too much. Now, I've had discussions with people online, I've even been asked once, to try and post a small clip from Fiddler on the Roof, because somebody online on Facebook was saying, I've been banned from doing this, I can't actually post it. I posted it fine. I posted 2 songs from Fiddler on the Roof, making it explicit that I was posting it because of the Jewish question, because of the current focus on Judaism and the horrific things that are going on in Palestine. Now, there is a limited amount of freedom, I will admit, on social media, but I do think at the moment we're at a bit of a crux point of what we're allowed to do and whether the oligarchy, the real tech giants, the real paymasters in a way, are, what am I trying to say here? Whether they are actually going to stamp down on this at any given point in the future. And I'd be interested to know what Alex and what Yanis maybe think of that. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, let me see your hands if you would like to come in. All right, so I'll call 2 speakers in to give our roaming mic team a bit of a heads up. So we'll go to the front first, followed by comrade at the back in the plaid shirt. So over to this comrade here at the front first, and then the comrade at the back.
Hello. Thank you very much. Hello. Hello. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Yanis. Thank you, Alex. I'm a PhD student at Oxford. I work on AI and I work on quantum computing. Every single day, my artist friend will ask me, why is AI being used to copy Miyazaki movies? Why is AI being used to create poems when, why can't they just do things such as solving climate change? And I tell them, I really wish that's the case because my entire work is focused on solving climate change. But as Alex, you mentioned before, every single time there's a technological breakthrough, it is not the scientist, not the inventor that decide what this breakthrough is useful. As long as we don't own the means of production, any technological disruption will always be used to facilitate exploitation and further control. And just as the last person kindly asked the question in terms of the role of social media and oligarchy in the state of the West, I was born and raised in China. I come from a place where technology itself have 100% being used for censorship, for overall surveillance of the population, and for spreading the propaganda of those in power. So my question to you is, considering that we live in an age in which tech workers are not really what you consider traditional working class, but still nevertheless a potential force for disruption of this giant industry that is overtaking every aspect of our life, how can each and every tech worker, as well as each and every one of us, who have, whose biggest asset is really our data, by which we mean our attention, how can we use that to create our own method of whether it be computing, whether it be technology, to counter the overwhelming influence those tech companies and those in government have over our lives? Thank you very much.
Thank you, comrade. So we'll go over to the comrade in the plaid chair sitting next to the aisle, and then hands up. Okay, we'll go someone on this side of the room. We've had some speakers from this side, so we'll go to the comrade in the red shirt sitting over there.
Yeah, I'd like to say a little bit more about this concept of techno-feudalism and some of the problems associated with it, because it gives an enormous prominence to, in particular, the role of finance and the role of tech. And the nexus between finance and tech is a very old one, going right back to the dot-com bubble of the 1990s. But I think where Yanis sees this as a supersession of the capitalist mode of production, I would much rather see this as a sign of dysfunction within late capitalism. The reason why these sectors have such enormous prominence today is that you have this process in the 1980s and 90s of restructuring in which the units of capital get smaller, and then after that you have this huge emergence of much bigger units of capital led by finance and led by tech. These are absolutely giant capitalist firms, but for me it's very important we identify them as capitalist firms. And there's two specific elements in Yanis's writings that I want to just raise some questions about. The first is about this notion of central banks powering the capitalist system forwards through creating money. Of course, we all know about quantitative easing and the other phenomena that we talk about and Yanis writes about and so on. This is a sign of the dysfunction of capitalism. It's a response precisely to the deep crisis of profitability that again and again the system plunges into crisis, and central banks have to generate money to try to drag the economy forwards. Secondly, you look at these giant tech firms, one of these tech firms, they're absolutely caught up in the battle of competition. Look at the inter-imperialist competition going on right now over AI technology. And look, in particular, at the massive accumulations of capitalist wealth mobilized by these firms. If you look at Alphabet, the parent company of Google, it mobilizes £150 billion of fixed assets. It has over 160,000 employees. It's a far bigger capitalist firm than any of the big auto giants historically have been. And incidentally, it's a potential terrain for working class organisation. And it points me to the last point I want to make. Why is it so important that we assert that we're still in a capitalist society? Because of the route out. I don't want to be in the position of Spartacus, the very heroic Roman slave who rose up, but couldn't envisage a socialist society because of the backwardness of the mode of production that Spartacus lived under. Marx quite rightly said that Spartacus was wonderful because he fought and struggled, and I'm all for that, but I want to win. I want to break capitalism and build a socialist society on its ruins.
Thank you, comrade. So we'll go to the comrade in the red sitting over there, and then our next speaker will be, people can put their hands up. Okay, we'll go to the back to the comrade in the blue shirt with the sunglasses. Yeah. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I work in technology risk assurance within financial services and tech firms, and over 2 decades I've basically come to realize that the reason that big financial institutions and the big banks and the big tech firms can get away with iniquities and corruption is because government allows them, the politicians allow them, and they're just too weak and scared to oppose them. So, the question I have for Yanis Varoufakis is, I like Yanis, I've read all his works. Syriza came to power in 2015, that gave the left some hope, gave us some hope. And the highly principled person like yourself, Yanis, came into power, that gave us so much hope. And then I know you had all that trouble with the EU Troika and the unjust agreement they tried to impose on Greece, which you opposed on principle, and I admire that. And I know Tsipras forced that through, and then you resigned. And I was really disappointed then. Could you not have gritted your teeth a bit more and stayed on and fight against those powers, even if they impose that agreement on Greece, and fight back and just stay there? And give us hope that the left can get into power and stay there. As you said, it's probably a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's not like the left wins power every other election. So could you have stayed on a bit more and fought back against all these iniquitous banks and tech companies? Thank you very much.
Thank you, comrade. So we'll go to the back, followed by comrade in the glasses. Is that a polo shirt? I think that's a polo shirt. Okay, so over to you first.
Hi everybody, thanks for organizing, thanks for the speakers. The question is probably to Yanis, opportunity for like a discussion hopefully. That, like you called it techno-feudalism. Full disclosure, I haven't read the book, too much information out there, I can't read everything, but does framing it as feudalism give us anything? Does it give us like new ways of seeing things that we couldn't see before? Does it give us new ways of organizing? What does it give us? Because this has other names in economics, right? It has two-sided markets, it's just your regular monopoly. There's other concepts that people have used to describe the phenomenon. So you framed it as feudalism. What does that give us?
Thank you, comrade. And just a reminder that they'll have plenty of time at the end to answer questions. So if anyone's not got a 3-minute contribution for just a question, you are more than welcome to take the chance to ask them, and hopefully they've got some time to answer them at the end. So following the comrade in the blue sitting here towards the middle. Can I see some hands, people that like to come in? Ooh, hold on. Okay, comrade in the black somewhere there. Okay, there we go, over to you.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of add to this idea, this debate we're having about social media, AI, all these things, and the idea that there's anything particularly different about them that makes them different from, say, standard capitalism and the way that capitalism exploits workers and what opportunities that gives us. Because I think we can often hear about these systems, AI systems particularly these days, as if there's some kind of magical thing going on there, some kind of mystical thing that we can never really understand. There's even, I had a talk at my university in Oxford recently by an IT person telling us to use AI more. And he was saying, you know, these systems can reason now and think, and I was thinking, this is ridiculous really, because they're not really, they are putting words together from what they found on the internet in ways that are quite clever, but it's basically just plagiarising human text, stuff that's been written by humans, in a way that makes sense to us, but there's nothing, you know, it's not like the machine is thinking. But also I think there is a massive amount of labour, human labour going into these systems. I'm just reading an article in Time magazine about the fact that so much kind of crap creeps into these ChatGPT systems because the internet is full of crap, basically, like sexism and racism and all these things, that it's got to be detoxified. And there were workers in Kenya who were being paid $2 an hour to detoxify this material. Now, that has implications in all sorts of ways. First of all, it means they're being exposed to the actual horrendous material out there, and that has issues in terms of their mental health. And the second thing is they're being absolutely exploited to the hilt by being paid $2 an hour for these systems that are being used to make billions of dollars. Now, that seems to me to show that it's very much part of capitalism, and it also seems to me to show there's massive opportunities to organise. And you know, we don't have to go to a place like Kenya, which is absolutely key to these systems, but also in our own countries. Certainly in the universities, there's a huge amount of research work going into AI and developing these systems. And here we have universities where our pay, university lecturers and researchers' pay, has been cut by 30% over the last decades or so. So there's massive problems when you've got a workforce that's dissatisfied, underpaid, whether it's in Kenya or in Britain, when we can organise. And that's, I think it was Rosa Luxemburg that says that the way to smash the chains of capitalism is where they're forged, and that applies to this as much as any other industry.
Thank you, comrade. So we'll go to the comrade in the black side, in the middle of everything. Sorry, team. And then, do we have some hands from this side of the room? I feel like this side of the room did more of the reading. Okay, so we have the comrade in the white side there at the front. I'll follow comrade over there.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch upon the discussion on feudalism and how it is a system that is characterized by the feudal lords using extra economic power in order to pressure people into labor. And I think understanding that nowadays it does not look as violence, as force, does not mean that it is not extra economic power still. And I think a very clear example of this is looking at how governments are overthrown around the world. While the classic coup d'etat that looked like the military going into the street, a president that probably ends up dead or in prison, modern coup d'etats, thinking about, for example, Brazil, look like lawfare, look like big media corporations controlling the societal perception of certain parties or certain leaders and using that to overthrow government. And therefore, I think that when we have a context of a ruling class that is not only able to control the means of production, but also the means of organization and how we think and act, that does not only present the question of whether this means that the economic structures are changing in terms of whether we change from traditional capitalism into techno-feudalism, but I think it also raises the question of how do we organize under this context in which we do not only have to materially fight for power, but we also have to fight for power to convince or control conduct up until a certain point, which I think is also what weakens the new left parties that have been born in the last 15 or so years. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we'll go to the front, and then I think, depending on how long you're planning on speaking, which, no pressure, take your time. We'll see if we have time for a final contribution. So, over to you.
I probably won't be too long. But, thank you very much to Yanis and Alex for coming and talking. Full disclosure, I think I lean slightly more onto the Yanis side of things. I think the book Techno-Feudalism is a very important read, even if you don't fully subscribe to the ideas. It's worth analysing because of how well it deep dives into the way that the techno-feudalist lords or the cloud capitalists or the billionaires, however you want to call them, how they exert control over us and how they, the ways they've got their fingers into society that is kind of hard for us to see when you just look at it on a surface level. And I think there's been a lot of talk about why is it necessary to redefine these terms? Is it necessary to call things techno-feudalism when we already have terms like capitalism? Does it confuse the argument? Does it make us not fight the right targets? And as the comrade at the back said earlier, that we ultimately want to win. And so for me, I think it's incredibly important if we do want to win, we have to understand what we're fighting. and we have to understand how they're fighting back against us and how they're stopping us from achieving the goals that we all want to achieve. And it can often seem like the systems that they have made can serve us. They can be to our benefit. We heard about social media before, how it can be used for us to mobilise, it can be used for us to organise and share information that the mainstream media might otherwise not be giving us. But I think the danger of viewing these systems as our ally is that they ultimately aren't in our control. And as much as it might seem that we can do these great things with it, they ultimately rely on forcing us into echo chambers or manipulating us through algorithms, essentially making us feel like we are achieving great things on the internet, where really we're having just the same conversations with each other while generating immense amounts of wealth and data for the people that we're trying to ultimately get rid of. So yeah, whether or not it is necessary to call it techno-feudalism or to have all these other things, I don't think we should get too bogged down in that, but it is definitely important to recognise the immense levels of power that these oligarchs have, and not be flippant about the fact that we might have to change tactics or might have to bring in new ideas and bring in new forms of thinking to oppose these powers. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think on that positive note of organising to win, I will bring the discussion to an end. It has been amazing to hear what everyone has had to say. Judging by sort of the conversations and how light it was in the room, in your 3-minute conversations, I'm going to say that the discussion doesn't just end here, but it continues throughout. So that's all from me. Thank you, everyone. I will bring our speakers in the opposite order that they spoke. So we'll start with Callinicos, who will speak for 5 minutes, and then we'll go over to Yanis. So Alex, take it away.
Okay, I'll sit down to avoid causing everything tumbling down. Thanks very much, everyone, for a really great discussion and for all the interesting points that have been made in the course of that discussion. Let me just emphasise that, of course, there's a risk in this kind of discussion that if you're sceptical about the idea of techno-feudalism, it implies that you're some kind of Luddite who's indifferent to or even hostile to the digital world. This is absolutely not true of me. You know, I'm to my iPhone, I'm afraid. It's a serious problem, I have to confess. And we have to take the digital world seriously politically. We have to engage with it. I mean, someone was talking about how one intervenes in social media. I think, my personal opinion, it's not the official line of the SWP, that it was completely idiotic for all those liberals and leftists to abandon Twitter after Trump won the presidential election, because it remains a very important terrain of both debate and spreading information. The idea that, you know, all the good thinking people should go off into the ghetto of blue sky and so on, I think was a big mistake in the concrete case, but reflects a kind of politics, well, oh, we have to keep our hands clean and stay away from the nasty people. That's not what life is like, and in particular, it's not what politics is like. Yanis is absolutely exemplary. I think he's got over a million followers on Twitter, which makes me frankly very envious. I think that the kind of changes that big tech have wrought economically are significant. It's significant that they found new ways of making profits from us, particularly, but not solely, not by any means solely, through stealing our data. That's an important change, and it's important to understand that. But it coexists with all sorts of other ways in which they grab profits out of us. central to which is grabbing profits from our labour. And I think there's a kind of tension in what Yanis says. He talks about surplus value, but, you know, for Marx, surplus value is, you know, part of the new value that workers create. You know, if workers are no longer the principal source of profits, what is the dynamic of the system? And I think we're in a system where we're still caught up in the logic of competitive accumulation and, as the comrade at the front said, of technological innovation which is driven by profit seeking. To me, that's not in any sense recognisably feudal. Feudal lords didn't have, you know, people in their dungeons who were creating new technologies. It's not how feudalism works. I think the biggest problem with social media is the way they reinforce the fragmentation of the social world. They encourage individualization and turning into ourselves. And the challenge for us is to identify the sites of collective action. If you think about the Palestine demos, they're great in so many different ways, but I think in the long term, the most important thing about them is how they give us confidence in ourselves, not as individuals, but as part of a collective, as part of a movement. But you can't separate that kind of site of collective action from the site of collective action that is work, that is the struggle against exploitation, that is the efforts of workers to organise themselves, and in doing so, to open the door to a liberated society. Thanks a lot, I'll shut up.
Thank you very much for that, comrade. And just for our final contribution, I'll pass it over to Yanis to sum up for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much. Let me start by saying to the comrade who asked me, did I not have gritted my teeth many years ago in state government, so that, you know, we showed the benefit in state government? Well, the only way, comrade, I could have done that. Remember, I was not a backbencher. I was not John MacDonald querying whether I should leave the Labour Party or not. But anyway, but that's another one. I was a finance minister. My signature had to go to a document that was 1,253 pages that handed over the complete inventory of public assets of my country to a cabal of oligarchs. I would have to dismantle the publicly owned and constructed electricity system and hand it over to 5 millions. I would have to reduce pensions by 40%, government. No. You know what? I would rather die than sign that. And you know what? Saying no and resigning when the alternative is to be co-opted and to defect to the opposite side is a revolutionary act. Now, I wasn't expecting to have this discussion about techno-feudalism. I'm very pleased we're having it. Alex, my Marxist political economy and your Marxist political economy, they are not two different camps. It's a question of all of us comrades, not just you, Alex, and me, sitting around and having a very fruitful discussion that will bring about a dialectical proposal as to exactly how do we define capital today in relation to big tech, and how do we answer the pertinent question, which is, how do we organize people, whom do we organize, and to what purpose? And I think we would agree. Because the enemy, they're not just bastards, some of them may not be that bastardic, usually they are. No, the enemy is capital. Let's be clear on this. I never said anything else in my book. And I'm not saying that we live in feudalism, folks. Maybe the word techno-feudal has not managed to convey to you the meaning of what I'm saying, which is we haven't gone back to feudalism. We've gone forward to a form of capitalism which needs to be differentiated from what we've had so far for two reasons I will come to in a second. But it's going forward to something worse. Remember Rosa Luxemburg? Socialism or barbarism? Well, call it barbarism if you don't like the word techno-feudalism. Look, my point is that the system we live in now today, call it what you might, call it cloud capitalism if you want. Let's not get stuck on particular words. The system we live in is one in which increasingly power is in the hands of the people that own a particular mutation of capital, what I call cloud capital, which is very different. You mentioned, Alex, Elon Musk, Tesla, and so on. And you mentioned the cars. Those cars are standard terrestrial old-fashioned capital, nothing to do with feudalism. Twitter, however, is a very different machine. It's a different kind of capital. And that's why he was smart enough to purchase it. Because it's a kind of capital which I call cloud capital that doesn't produce anything. It is not a produced means of production, comrades, unlike industrial robots and unlike AI machines that are used in production plants. No, Twitter modifies behavior. It's not a question of them stealing our data. It's a question of them owning machines that can train us to train them, to train us to train them, to do things that increase their rents, their super profits, as you put it, Alex. And when you have that kind of situation, that kind of system, and increasingly, surplus value, in classical Marxist political economy, surplus value is extracted from the labor process. What I'm saying is that, none of these big tech companies, when they're engaged in what I call techno-feudal activities, none of them produce surplus value. Surplus value is produced the old-fashioned way. We agree, Alex. But what they do is they siphon off. Remember what Marx was saying? Of course you do remember. Surplus value becomes what? It becomes rent for the landlord. It becomes interest for the banker. And what is left over is the profit of the capitalist. Well, now we have a new form of rent, cloud rent, which, every time you buy an electric bicycle from Jeff Bezos on Amazon, 40% of that goes to Jeff Bezos. This is why Jeff Bezos is stinking rich. These are not profits, these are rents, and we have to understand that. So, you mentioned my discussion with my father on the one that I made up. He had died by the time I was writing that. What is the difference between Thomas Edison and Jeff Bezos? They're both monopoly capitalists.
Time out, please, comrade.
Let me just, because you asked me to defend a book which I wasn't even given an opportunity to speak to. So I need 2 minutes, if I may, just 2 minutes.
1.5.
Okay, I won't speak anymore.